September 18th. I'd like to call to order the Human Resources Appointment and Equity Committee meeting. Council Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Calling the roll, Ms. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller is absent at the moment. Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. We have a quorum.
All right, and I believe we can excuse Mr. Miller's absence while it is not required. I will make the motion. Do I have a second? All right, it's been moved in second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, is there any public comment?
No, no one has signed in.
All right, and I'll make a motion to approve the meetings from the July 31st meeting. Do I have a second? Are there any questions, comments, or concerns regarding the meeting minutes? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all right. Meeting minutes have been approved. We will now move to matters referred to the committee. If you will read the first item into the record.
Resolution number 2018-0178, confirming the county executive's reappointment of Matthew P. Carroll to serve on the Gateway Economic Development Corporation of Greater Cleveland Board of Trustees for an unexpired term ending 5/31/2022.
Thank you. And it looks like we have our regional director in place, and so I will respectfully request that you give us a little bit of background. You can stay seated if you'd like from there with regards to this. So, and if you'll just give us a little bit of background, what this position entails, the makeup of the board membership, things like that. So I'll turn it over to Michelle Pomerantz.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brown. I'm here to, do I have to hold this staying pushed in, or do I let it go?
You're good. Once it's green,
Okay,
you're good.
great, thank you. We are respectfully requesting a reappointment of Matt Carroll to the Gateway Board, which is an Ohio nonprofit corporation, and this is pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code. The Board of Trustees of this corporation is composed of representatives from the City of Cleveland as well as Cuyahoga County. The county executive and the administration feel that Matt Carroll will do an amazing job and continue on with the work he has been doing to help promote the interests of the county council, the county executive, and the citizens of Cuyahoga County.
Thank you very much. Before we call Mr. Carroll, do you know what the breakdown of the appointments are for the city of Cleveland versus the county, number-wise?
That I don't know, but I can get that to you this afternoon.
Okay, all right. And I will now ask if Mr. Carroll will come up, and you might be able to lend us some insight with regards to the makeup.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
We have 5 members. There are 2 appointed by the city, 2 appointed by the county, and then 1 person jointly.
Excuse me, Mr. Carroll, is your microphone on?
There we go. Yeah, 2 by the city, 2 by the county, and 1 joint appointment. Tends to be a city employee appointed and a county employee appointed as well. This body approved Ken Silliman to be the joint appointment, I think, fairly recently.
Thank you very much. And if you could just give us a little bit of background for for those who are viewing, and what it is that you do on this board and how you would like to continue to serve.
Yes, Madam Chair. Gateway Board, as Michelle mentioned, is a nonprofit organization designed to manage the 2 facilities. It's not involved with the Brown Stadium, but involved with the Q and baseball park. And working closely with the teams, it maintains the facility, keeps an eye on long-term needs, helps with operations, and just makes sure both facilities run well, covering all the issues you would imagine, including working with the city on parking and on traffic and on all related items. With construction at the Q now, there's some parking and sort of flow issues over there that we're all involved with. It's a small staff. It's just 5 or 6 employees, and they're really responsible for quite a bit of work, but again, in concert with the teams. As you members of the committee know, also the Gateway works closely with what we call major capital projects, so that when the sin tax spending was reapproved in 2014, funding was created that goes towards these major capital projects, and that's something that the Gateway nonprofit is required to pay for. Those are large items that either team might need that are legitimate improvements or redos of parts of the stadium and the ballpark. So they manage a lot of those projects, work closely with engineers and others, and just keep a close eye on the facilities.
Okay, thank you very much. I know there's been some discussion around the resources relative to the syntax. Can you just speak a little bit to some of the capital improvements that have been made and where we are financially with those items?
Madam Chair, the board has a process where both teams come forward with requests. They basically lay out the things that they believe need to be done, and then Gateway, with its legal staff and with its other advisors, determines if it fits the lease definition for major capital. And through a process with the Gateway Board, those items are approved or not approved, but when they go to the board, they're submitted for approval. If they're approved, those funding requests come to the county with the syntax dollars that have been collected. I think as you may know, about $60 million worth of the syntax was put in a bond issue to make that amount of money available for projects. So again, for both teams as they need them, as projects come up. I would say the needs of both facilities have to be looked at in a long-term way. They're both built in the mid-90s. They both will have ongoing needs of large amounts. You will see some pretty large expenditures for HVAC, for scoreboards, and for things like that. The lease that they have with the teams have, both teams have those sorts of burdens on the public, both the city and the county, to support those kinds of improvements. So it's again, long-term needs, not something that will end in anytime soon. And I think we just work hard, both not just Gateway organization, but of course the city and the county work hard to try to manage those challenges.
And the last thing that I just want to maybe highlight and point out, that if you can confirm this, is that the two facilities are publicly owned. I know when we had some challenges or pushback from the public that didn't recognize that those facilities are publicly owned. So can you speak to our responsibility to maintaining those properties?
That's a great point, Madam Chair. That really is the reality. The teams are tenants in the facilities. Gateway's sort of the official landlord, but the ownership reverts back to the city and the county in the end. So they're public facilities. They have to be kept up. And we've learned over the years that many cities wrestle with building new facilities, which is a huge challenge. And I think you want to do everything you can to maintain what you have. That reduces the amount of expenditure you'd have to have, but it's clearly a public responsibility to keep those facilities in good working order.
And not to sound like a cheerleader for our tenants, but I think we do have pretty good partnerships with our tenants.
And I'm sure that is true. I mean, we could not, Gateway, the board, the organization, couldn't do what they do without that kind of day-to-day, very much day-to-day partnership on the smallest and largest issues. It's a very, very solid partnership between the two organizations.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up to my colleagues for questions, comments, or concerns. Councilman Jones.
Matt, can you clarify again the ownership dynamic between the city and the county with both facilities? Do they both share them equally? How is the ownership divided?
Madam Chair, to the councilman, again, the Gateway serves as the landlord, and as far as the lease is concerned. The ownership of the two facilities, if it came to actually reverting to one or the other, there tends to be a closer tie with the county and the arena, and a closer tie between the city and the ballpark. But to get to the final point of ownership, it would be a shared responsibility. It would be, again, the county obviously is funded through the syntax, that's been the revenue source. So, but we work closely with the city on those kinds of things as well. So if you got to the point of actual ownership in the end, those are the two publics have that connection to the two facilities.
Okay. How many dollars remain from the last offering syntax?
The amount that I mentioned before, Councilman?
Yes.
So that the majority of those dollars have been spoken for. We do on an annual basis have a little bit of money that is left over. Their debt is paid and various expenditures are made. But every year, a little bit of extra money is generated. But for the most part, that amount of money has been spoken for.
It's all been spoken for
At the moment.
And again, if you hadn't already said it, what were some of the major, or at least a major change for each facility that was covered under the dollars?
Again, so painting is an example. Weather, sort of dealing with harsh weather, painting. You have HVAC requirements, you have concrete you have to keep up. And then there's the other, the sort of scoreboard type things, the other implements. There's a lot of technology that goes with scoreboards, sound systems, et cetera. So you can imagine facilities like that, there's a large number of items that need to be kept up.
How about the roof on the arena? Has that been addressed or
That's
brought
been
into
an expenditure
conversation?
too, that's what they've been working on recently, at the Q. That's not directly part of the transformation project, but it's a thing that they've been working on recently.
Are there any requests in the future that we're aware of as of yet? Something pending in the future?
Councilman, they're ongoing requests, so it's a fairly frequent and regular process that items are brought to the board. I will say too, the teams do front some of the spending themselves, that when they need to get something done, they will bring the item to Gateway, Gateway will approve it, and then the teams will, in some cases, put the money forward that will be paid back later.
Okay. There were commitments, community benefit agreement commitments made in the beginning. I have not yet received a report. I'm certain I haven't seen it about what those, how those minority inclusion efforts have gone, contracts, workforce opportunities. I would like to see a report as well. But if you
Through the chair, Councilman, I actually have a recent report for you on the transformation construction project. There is some information I can provide to you.
okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Gallagher?
You said that there's an understanding about the ballpark, Cleveland, the arena, the county. I was under the impression that the arena was the county and the ballpark was the city, to the point that, and this has been my position for many years.
That's what I meant to say, Councilman, by the way.
Okay,
But
because
Arena County ballpark.
if
yeah.
we divested ourselves, and I would have given the arena to Mr. The owner of the team for $1, kept the land, and I think we would have been much further ahead. My concern is, and I'll ask you this, is that when the teams do put money into scoreboards, things like that, that's revenue generating, not for us, it's for them. What's your position on that? Even though they front the money and many times get that money back down the road, if they're doing it to raise their revenues, which is fine, why on our backs? Why don't we jump in on that?
Through the chair to the councilman, we do have a lease arrangement, and the lease requires that Gateway pays for certain major capital if it meets the standard. Scoreboard's an example of that. I think we could argue that the split between public and private responsibility is good. I think you've heard that before, but it is good if you compare it to other communities, and I think the teams would say that too. But at the moment, it's a specific part of the lease that, and I should say too, for Gateway itself, Gateway is virtually funded by the teams. Gateway has no actual revenue.
Right.
So they pay rent, they pay operations expenses, they pay the business improvement district expenses, they pay property tax.
Which is little known outside on the street. When the
Right.
folks come in here complain, it's a pretty good deal, and I think it's set up properly. I was just worried about that split, because I was always under the impression that it was pretty defined, not gray.
It's just that if it came to you would think the idea of it coming to that is, hopefully not a pretty remote possibility.
Thanks.
And finally, after hearing both of my colleagues, can you speak to the standards? I understand there's a certain threshold as far as dollar amounts when it comes to some of the everyday maintenance activities versus the major improvements. Can you speak to that?
Madam Chair, to be constituted as major capital has to be $525,000 expense. And it can't just be random items put together. It has to be basically a component, has to be sort of a uniform group of projects, things that go together, like the heating system or the ventilation system. But that's the cutoff. And that's where the public responsibility comes in.
Thank you very much. Councilman Jones?
Matt, you've been on the board for several years now. How long has that been?
Councilman, I think maybe 2011 or 2012.
11. I was just trying to understand the language. You're being reappointed, but it says to an unexpired term. Why not your own term finishing out? What's the story behind that?
I actually don't know. I don't know if you know, Michelle.
When I spoke with the folks at Gateway, they said it was an unexpired term. I can get more details on that. I know that we have had some lapse in the term that Matt was serving and is now, which is why I'd asked for a second reading suspension. But they had mentioned it was unexpired, so
Okay,
term
we're gonna
term
give
is
you-
I think you
started,
got a
Councilman.
life, I think you got a lifeline here, so.
oh, good. Oh, thank you.
Trevor Mackler, County Council staff. The reason why the language says unexpired term is because Mr. Carroll's term that he was serving, the previous term expired, I think sometime 6 or 7 months ago or whenever the date was. So the term that he was serving expired. So he continued to serve until he got reappointed and then confirmed by council. So that's why it says unexpired term.
Expired.
So he's still serving that same amount of time that if he was reappointed and confirmed at that time when his original term expired, but it's because the term already expired. So
And that's
why
within the Ohio Revised Code, is that?
Correct,
the
yeah, so he
standard?
continued to serve until officially being reappointed.
And Harold was appointed by city, county? Do you know which one of the 5 slots he filled? The joint, I didn't catch the name you mentioned.
That was, who was the joint appointment? That was, Ken, sorry.
Ken Sullivan.
He is the joint appointment, between the city and the county, so.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If there are no further questions, I'd like to move this item to the full body of the council under second reading suspension. Do I have a second?
Second?
It's been moved and second. If there are no questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, thank you very much. If you'll read the next item into the record.
Resolution number 2018-0180, confirming the county executive's appointment of various individuals to serve on the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County for various unexpired terms. I'd also like the record to reflect that Councilwoman Conwell is also in attendance.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to Ms. Pomerantz, our regional director, if you would give us a little bit of background on the following appointments.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The Adams Board has state appointments and county appointments, and the 3 appointments that we're recommending and hoping that will be approved today include Reverend Golston, who was a state appointment, and we're asking for him to be appointed for the county appointment seat, as Dr. Boehm, who is here today, as well as Mr. Cade for new appointments to the Adams Board. And the Adams Board is the board responsible for planning, funding, and monitoring of public mental health and alcohol and other drug addiction services to the residents of Cuyahoga County. Also in attendance today on behalf of Reverend Golston is Ms. Carol Krajewski, who serves on the Adams Board and helps supports. She may be able to speak not only on behalf of Reverend Golston, but any other questions that may be needed, required, or considered with regards to the Adams Board.
I open it up to the colleagues. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns for Ms. Pomerantz regarding this position? All right, there being none. Mr. Cade, if you'll kindly step up and state your name for the record and let us know a little bit about your background and your desire to serve on this particular board.
Well, good morning. My name is Erskine Cade, and as stated, I am a candidate for appointment to the Adams Board. Now, why is this important? What do I bring to it? First of all, I come with about 40 years of experience on the corporate side, whether it was on the oil company or whether on the banking. And in that capacity, I served on a number of boards, here in the city, around the state, and across the country. And currently, I'm a partner in 2 consulting practices. One is on the healthcare side, and the other one is dealing with Fortune 500 companies. So what do I bring to this? I bring a lot of community experience. I, at one time, chaired the board for the Center of Families and Children. I served on that board for many years. and still an ex officio, member of that board. I've served in capacities in terms of United Way, whether it was here in Cleveland, or I chaired also the board for the Ohio United Way. And so in those and other capacities that developed a pretty strong, idea in things of what is needed. What do I bring to the board? One is bring probably some ideas as to how we move forward with some of the programs. Secondly, is I always consider myself as a team player, and trying to understand exactly what it is, what's the mission, how do we go about carrying out that mission. And certainly here with the Adams Board, and the work that they undertake, on a mental health side or whatever it is, I think I have a good background, in terms of that. Now, I'm not a doctor or an expert in terms of mental health. I have an executive MBA from Case, and I think that and other things that I've done, in my life, qualifies me for this. You should know is that I was appointed to this board maybe about a year or so ago, and by the county executive, and you went through the orientation and all of the things that needed. But I found that at that particular time that it posed a conflict with particularly my travel schedule, and usually I'm traveling 3 to 4 days a week, in my capacities in terms of what I do. So that schedule is somewhat, better now, and would have the time to be able to, to serve in a very meaningful capacity on this board. I know the county, I know the needs of the citizens of this county, and as I said, I've been involved in many aspects of that. Going back, I've served on city boards. At one time I was on the board of the zoning appeals for the city of Cleveland for about 11 years. I was appointed to the State Lottery Commission that I served on there for about 10 years and so forth. So again, I have pretty good background and expertise in how boards function, and and understanding the mission of the board and who we serve more than anything else is what is important to me. So with that, I mean, hopefully it gives you some idea as to who I am, what I am, and what I can bring to this Adams Board.
All right, thank you very much. I'll open it up to my colleagues for questions. You have none? Councilwoman Conwell?
Good morning, Mr. Cade.
Good morning.
With your business expertise, is there a plan to bring in any private dollars? Have you, since you said you've been on the board for a couple years, have you been working with for some private dollars? Because the state is cut back, we can't afford to give more, and we know the mental health crisis is kind of growing.
Yeah. Councilwoman, I want to correct that. I did not serve on the Adams Board.
Okay.
I had to step down. I resigned.
Gotcha.
Because of my inability at that time to make the board meetings. So with regard to seeking and corporate contributions and things, both in my capacities at the Standard Oil Company and BP and at Key Bank, I was involved in many of those decisions in terms of dollars flowing into community organizations. So, what is my ability at this point, to work with corporations and others? I think I have a strong background in that and know who, many of the players are that I can go to with those types of requests.
Okay, and in terms of lobbying downstate, how do you view your role to lobby downstate?
Well, I have been lobbying, let me put it this, I probably have been in this capacity of lobbying for over 30 years. And I've lobbied all over this country and then some outside of the country. There's probably not a state house in the U.S. that I have not been in as well as Washington, D.C. So, the thing about consulting and lobbying is once you have to develop a relationship, with the members and the relationship with those that you are serving. And then, understand what is the issue, and have, the relationships that be able to take that before those that are making the decisions. In many cases that I have was successful in bringing back substantial dollars. And I don't like to speak about clients, but one of them is the Port Authority. I brought back a lot of dollars, to the Port Authority from the state, for various operations or things that they were trying to do, are trying to do. And I continue to do that, in that capacity, as representing them in that regard. And also with some of the neighborhood development corporations, whether it's Cleveland Neighborhood Progress and so forth, brought back some fairly substantial dollars to that organization. So I know what the system is, I know how to work it, and then build the capacity and the relationships, to be successful in that side. And with regard, Councilwoman Conwell, I'd like to think of myself, I have a relationship with all 132 members of the General Assembly. They know me by name, I know them by name, and as well as in the administration, from the governor's office and every state agency that I have worked with. So that's my background, and so.
So that was going to be my next question. Did you have a relationship with the current gubernatorial candidates?
Yes.
Okay, both of them?
Both of them. Yeah, I've, with Rich Cordray, I've probably known for, ever since he's been in office, at the state level and at the federal level, and same thing with Mike DeWine.
Okay. So you feel that, so you really, do you know any of the background of the board and the money situations that they're having right now?
I knew it then. I can't say that I have have a full knowledge of what it is now. Okay. And if this appointment is confirmed, then that is some of the things that I will learn. They have an orientation that you will go through, and all of those kinds of things will be discussed. And so I'll have a better knowledge of what those are. Should I be confirmed and going through that that orientation period.
And my last question, maybe, I'm hoping, would be, what would your personal thoughts be in terms of having a separate mental health levy in this county?
Councilwoman Conwell, I think that would be, at this point, I think it would be very difficult to try to get the funding for a separate levy. I mean, you look at the capacity, here, and I'm talking whether it's not, from a corporate standpoint, but from an individual standpoint. And I don't know what that capacity is. And I think, that is something you're really going to have to build a lot of, support, not only from governmental entities, but you're going to have to build it in terms of communities, in terms of, is this something that they're going to support? So that's the best answer I can give at this point. And I'd have to, really study that and understand it a lot more in terms of what would be the goal and the mission, of having a separate mental health levy.
So you don't have a personal feeling if
Well, my personal feeling, again, is that I don't know what the capacity is, to fund that type of a levy. Personally, I think is good. I mean, if we can, looking at the situations that we're confronting, whether there's mental health, whether it's alcohol and drug addiction, and all of these kinds of things, I think that the capacity is much more than the resource that we have. And when you look at Ohio, and we're probably one of the leading states in terms of opioid addiction, and that then you said the funding been cut at the state level. I don't see much of that changing. What is the capacity, from a county standpoint? But I think it would be a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
All right, did you have any?
And no, Councilwoman asked every question I was thinking, so thank you for the answers.
Asked and answered, okay. So I do have a question, and maybe Ms. Pomerantz might be better suited to answer. But I see that that your term is expiring June 30th of next year, which gives you a little less than a year to serve on this board. So my question is, are you filling the term of someone else? Are you completing someone else's term, or what?
This board was, because of the state recommendations and the county recommendations, we had been acting under the idea that Mr. Cade would fill this year term and then be reappointed for the county term, was what our intentions are. And that was communicated both with Carol as well as the executive director of the Adams Board. But we couldn't put him any farther because there was some lapse in time in the appointment process. So for purposes of doing what's right on this board, it's finished this 1 year, but our intent and hope that Mr. Cade would accept that when this process comes around, that he would be considered for a county appointment for the next term.
And I guess I would throw that question back to you, Mr. Cade. You would be willing to continue to serve another term after the 9 months?
Councilwoman Brown, absolutely.
Okay. And I guess, again, it appears that these are appointments, so are there 3 vacancies that we're dealing with here, or more?
That is correct.
3
3 vacancies. We want to right-size the Adams Board in the best way that we can, and for future meetings, that's going to probably be a lot of the other ones that are coming up. We're unpacking and finding ways that we make the boards compliant and finish out terms with the intention of the candidates that we are recommending that we would reappoint. So today we have 3 appointments that we're recommending to fill the capacity right now for the Adams Board.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Cade, it looks like you bring strong collaboration, leadership, and function to the boards, and so I thank you for coming before us this morning. And unless my colleague, Councilman Jones or
I
Conwell.
was curious as to
Yes.
how, beyond these 3 vacancy fillings, how many vacancies remain, if any?
For the Adams Board,
The Adams
we will be whole. We will be compliant after these 3 vacancies are filled. The other boards, that's a different story, Councilman.
We'll save that for another committee meeting.
That's great.
All right, and I do, thank you, Mr. Cade.
Well, thank you
All
very
right,
much.
and I do want to acknowledge the hard work that has been done since Michelle Pomerantz has stepped on board. We have had an absence in the regional director position, and it looks like she has hit the ground running. And so I want to thank you for your work. Our next individual is, I'm going to go with Dr. Greg Bain, only because I know he's present, and then I will yield to you so you can give us some background on Reverend Golston. But Dr. Bain, if you'd like to step forward and let us know, state your name for the record, and let us know what it is that you bring to this position and why you would like to serve.
Thank you. Good morning. I am Dr. Gregory Bain, and I am a psychiatrist, physician. I'm board certified in psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, and addiction medicine. And I just started my term as president of the Ohio Society of Addiction Medicine. And our mission is to help train other physicians in all specialties in dealing with addictions and alcohol and drug abuse. For the last 30 years, I've been on volunteer faculty at Case Medical School, and we train physician residents in family medicine, pediatrics, OBGYN, and psychiatry in how to treat addiction medicine. I have a particular interest in my capacity as president of the Ohio Society of Addiction Medicine to work with reentry programs. Men and women leaving prison, as you may know, are particularly at risk for overdose death at a rate of 17 times higher than any other time in their life. So we're working really hard with counties throughout Ohio to provide reentry programs, step-down units, programs that allow them to get subsidized housing and work while living in a residential capacity, to help them make that really, really daunting adjustment to life after prison. And as Mr. Cade mentioned, Ohio is always at ground zero in this opiate epidemic. There's a lot of books written about it, Dreamland being one, about how Ohio became a market for inexpensive black tar heroin over the last 20 years. And that market continues to be one of the biggest burdens on our society, our communities. So I feel very strongly about how to increase services. I like some models of using peer-certified counselors. That is, men and women who have been successful in their recovery can now get certified to provide counseling to other men and women that are early in treatment or are still struggling with the idea that they need treatment. As you may know, the vast majority of men and women that suffer from alcohol and drug abuse do not ever get to even one treatment counseling session. Only about 20% of those who need treatment ever really get to any treatment. But using peer, I think is a great strategy, using peer support. It's been used successfully in other counties, other states, I mean. Anyway, I feel very strongly about it, and I think that's what I can bring to the board.
Thank you very much. You mentioned an increase in services. How would you go about doing that with the limited resources?
Yeah, I think this, again, the certified peer counseling, which started here in Ohio, is a real motivator for men and women. After they've had a year clean and sober, they can get certified online, and that is a particular asset for emergency rooms and hospitals where our current staff often don't have the time or the emotional capacity to deal with somebody who's in an overdose. But using peer counselors who volunteer their time would be a terrific addition.
Excellent. And so as a person with field experience and having dealt with the population, I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity. There's been a lot of focus on the opioid epidemic versus in the African American community, there was the crack epidemic that didn't receive as much attention. Can you kind of speak to how you would be able, the differences that you see and have seen, I guess, with your historical service and some of the challenges that you might see in the urban community versus the new population being affected by the opioid crisis?
Absolutely. Yes, you know, when I first started in medicine 35 years ago, as you may know, opiates and heroin was more an inner city addiction, and now it's crack. And suburban, which was cocaine, is now heroin. In fact, there's been some very interesting research papers about how this recycles every 30 years. And currently, methamphetamine is making a huge gain in the Southwest United States. Oregon reported last year more overdose deaths due to methamphetamine than opiates. And it's slowly working its way here in Ohio, in Northwest Ohio. We have more and more methamphetamine. And as you may know, most overdose deaths now occur with fentanyl, Xanax. Unfortunately, most men and women don't even know what they're buying on the street. But you're right. This pattern is really very challenging. And at a number of the agencies that I used to work at, we deal with all addictions, both crack and heroin and alcohol.
And what I was excited to hear you say is that you also would like to focus on reentry, the reentry population. But I guess the other question I would have is, I think another underserved community is our mental health population. Can you speak to your expertise on how we might break the stigma related to mental health, and also how we can improve the treatment that's provided for that community?
Yeah, that is a major project for both the American Society of Addiction Medicine and Ohio. How do we make it, you know, there was a really good editorial, I don't know if you saw this, just 2 weeks ago, where in the New York Times, a physician wrote that 20 years ago, we were in this position with HIV, where physicians would see the consequences of HIV, but could never use the word AIDS or HIV. And we reached a tipping point where finally it was acceptable, partly because of protests. It became acceptable to talk about it, and there was a huge rush to treatment. We're at that same point with addictions. Physicians and medical personnel still feel inhibited about saying, you know, I'm seeing all the symptoms of alcohol and drug abuse. We really got to get you to talk with somebody. And that's a challenge. And we're hoping that someday we're going to get to that tipping point where it's okay to talk about it to your physician about alcohol and addiction.
The education component, do you have any questions from the committee? I'll yield to Councilman Galvin.
Probably too broad, but when the opioid thing hit us when we came on about 6 years ago, and it just kept getting worse. So and you said this is a cycling kind of thing. So once it's in the cycle, have we not learned from the past as to how to address it, or are these so unique in the cycle that they change just a bit? So the answer, which is difficult, but it becomes more difficult?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen the mixture of all the different types of overdose, you know, amphetamines and heroin and crack and alcohol and benzodiazepines are at an all-time high consumption. Alcohol's at a 50-year high consumption in the United States. And here we are legalizing marijuana, and it's going to be, I agree. It is a new challenge all the time, how to respond to this. We learned from the past, but it's more complicated than ever.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I don't know, I'm getting to the age where, I'm getting to the age. It kind of seems to me that, especially with marijuana, that legalizing is going to be the way to go, because at least then it's controlled and regulated. And I hate control and regulation, but in this situation, when people are buying dime bags on the street,
Yes.
and dying because something's in there that they don't know that hasn't been regulated.
Right.
I just wonder, are we at that tipping point? And everything I see, I think we are. And I think we struggle. It's like, what do we do?
Yes. No, it's a major challenge. I do think we're making slow progress. I really appreciate how many physicians from all specialties are interested in this training. We've been doing it at Metro and UH and the clinic, where all physicians, especially emergency room physicians and surgeons, really want to know how it could be, because they're the ones that are facing the patients that are in chronic pain, that are writing the prescriptions for opiates, and they really want to know how they can use other medicines that are not opiates to deal with both pain and anxiety and depression. So it's really nice when we have these training sessions every week. It's great to see all the different specialties represented in the same room, everyone sort of reaching out across the fence on how to solve it. So it's going to take, you're right, a community-wide effort to solve the problem.
Right. Well, I wouldn't want to take up any more of your time, but we have a safety committee meeting this afternoon. Down the line, if you would afford me the pleasure of maybe coming in and talking to my committee, because I think we're at wit's end.
Yes.
And so, thank you,
I would be
Doctor.
glad to, yes.
On a much broader scale, when my colleague speaks, it just brings to mind the point that our physicians and pharmaceutical companies have a huge part in this that we tend to discount or overlook. And not for you to speak to that, but I'm just making a comment. So I'll turn it back over to Councilwoman Conwell. So.
No, I'm really glad at the attorney generals throughout the country that are now suing Purdue Pharmaceutical in particular, that misled physicians. It's very analogous to tobacco companies. They should take responsibility, and I've been advocating that for years. They should be providing treatment for patients that have become addicted, and I think it's going to come to that. I think both Mike DeWine and Cordray both are in favor of that.
Doctor, what do you feel about a separate mental health levy?
I'm all for it. But I agree. I don't understand where we are, and I would need more information, but I would love to see it.
Okay, because I think that would actually bring, not a popularity is not the right word, but it would put mental health out there and get people to actually talk about it and maybe be more accepting.
Destigmatize, yep, constantly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We lost a mental health facility a few years ago, I believe, to Summit. What are your thoughts on the need, the still existing need for that type of facility in this area? And just what are your thoughts in general?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's discouraging when we see that happen. I do think that the medical community in general is much more interested. You know, it's one of the positive developments is that the medical community, especially the medical school and residencies, are really putting mental health at a priority, even if they're doing primary care, especially primary care. Their primary care physician really needs to know how to react and look for and listen for problems with addiction and mental health.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for taking the time
Yes,
to come out
thank you.
before us today. It's always advantageous and beneficial to the committee and to the public to put the names with the faces and to be able to hear firsthand the experience and the desire to serve on these committees. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Pomerantz, and I understand Reverend Golston couldn't be with us today, and if you'll be speaking on his behalf?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and then, like I had mentioned earlier, Carol Krajewski from the Adams Board is here if there's any other questions that I cannot answer. But I just wanted to let everybody here know that Reverend Golston has been serving on the Adams Board since 2009. He is currently serving as a state appointment on the Adams Board and was unanimously elected board chair this past June. As the state appointment term ends 6/30/19, the board recommended to county executive, and we approved that Reverend Golston be considered to fulfill the unexpired one-year term of Dr. Robert Fowler that expires on June 30th, 2020. This action would permit Reverend Golston to serve out his elected position of board chair since the Adams Board bylaws stipulate that officer terms are 2 years in length. Reverend Golston has had a history of service to his community. Primary examples of his service include being the president and co-founder of the Board of Trustees of the Hunger Network of Greater Cleveland, his active participation with the United Pastors in Mission, and his leadership of the Ministerial Crisis Center. His sensitivity and desire to help people struggling with brain-based mental illness and/or addiction is a byproduct of his observation of the struggles faced by his brother, who has since passed away. He holds a strong belief that spirituality plays an important role in personal recovery process for individuals living life with mental illness and/or addiction, and in that light has spearheaded the establishment of the board's faith-based outreach committee. That committee has a vision to lead Cuyahoga County's faith and spiritual community in helping people living with mental illness and addictions to recover and to promote the importance of integrating faith spirituality into the clinical healing process. More on that topic is that when we had asked him why he was interested in serving on the board and council, he replied his sensitivity and desire to help people struggling with brain-based mental illness and/or addiction is a byproduct of observation of struggles faced by his brother, who has since passed away. He has been a leader and active supporter of many efforts within the community to help others, and his biographical sketch reflects that he has been involved with developing positive initiatives to support children, youth, and adults in the Cuyahoga community throughout his career. Spirituality, this is a quote, "Spirituality plays an important role in the personal recovery process for mental illness and addiction, and people who are experiencing behavioral health problems often turn first to their faith-based organizations for help." And it's with this information that we recommend that we would consider his appointment.
And so he's currently serving as the board president, if I understood you correctly?
Correct.
Okay, and I know he was very instrumental in seeking out the leadership after the untimely death of Valeria. So I can personally speak to his commitment to the position, the commitment to the board, and I can, like I said, I know his engagement and his commitment is actually is there. I'll open it up to my council colleagues if you have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding Reverend Goldston. All right. There being none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll make the motion to move this to the full body of the council under second reading suspension. Do I have a second?
Second?
It's been moved in second. If there are no further questions, comments, or concerns, all the appointments suggested in item B will move forward to the full body of the council under second reading suspension. If you're in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right. That concludes, I think, our meeting, unless there's any miscellaneous business from the members. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.